Hey, I'm Grant. Welcome to Second Plate. After the previous show of doing some breakfast burritos, I really wanted to sit down and do a very simple, just breakfast with some classic ingredients. In particular, I really wanted to use some potatoes because I love them in breakfast burritos, but sometimes it's a little bit too hard to squeeze them in. So today we're going to be making eggs over easy, or say basted, with nice hash browns and some maple sausage. Should be a nice, simple, little classic breakfast that I think will turn out pretty good and then give us some fun ingredients to use on the next show. This is Second Plate. So the first thing that I want to start out with is the potatoes, because these take the longest to cook, and when you actually get them on, I want to make sure that I have plenty of time to react to how they're going. So I'm going to start by peeling these. I've gone back and forth on peeling potatoes. Sometimes I hear that it's super important, particularly if I were to chop up cubes. Other times it seems like you can feel free to just use them as is, but I figured I wanted to go for a nice peel. So I just have this nice little Y peeler. I used to use, I don't know exactly what it's called, but the pen one, and I'm surprised how much better this Y one works, particularly when you have a nice new one that cuts things pretty easily. So I'm just gonna go around, get this all off. I did cut these and, wash these before the show, just so you know I'm not pulling these straight out of the ground. But potatoes cook by far the longest, so I figured I'd get that going first because the eggs and the sausage are pretty simple, and once you've done it a couple times, they are pretty easy to just kind of leave as is. So I'm going to probably be doing this potato and a small one. But I decided I wanted to do some potatoes partially because they were on sale for like 99 cents a bag at my grocery store, so I figured, well, why not get a whole bunch, because if I mess up my recipe, I have plenty to practice with. But also I just feel like it's a very classic thing and is another one of the ingredients I find I'm constantly stuck with a whole bunch. Like with that sale, I really only need one or two for this recipe, but I bought an entire bag. So I got a couple ideas for the next episode, how we can turn this into some other stuff to go with our potato breakfast. Peeling potatoes is always something I felt was like very classically done by like your family. If you ever had someone who made a lot of potatoes, it takes a while to peel them. So I have a lot of memories of just like helping my parents just peel a bunch of potatoes for a dinner, because it takes way too long to do a ton of them by yourself. Especially if you're cooking for like 5 people, you kind of need them to do that. The downside then is you can tell who really is into it and who's not, because especially if you don't have a peeler, but if you're doing this with a knife, some people are very generous with how much they take off of their potatoes. So I usually like to peel towards the ground, but sometimes I'll just go get some nice curves like that to make sure I'm not leaving anything. And you'll notice sometimes I'll have just like a little marking like that. And what I like about the Y peeler is I can just kind of keep going over there until it's gone. But really it's not a big deal if you have any of the eyes of the potato in there. It's really just preference, like if you want a very clean looking potato. But we'll be chopping these up into matchsticks, as they're called. So it's not a big deal. I personally love hash browns that are done as matchsticks, or these really tiny little straws. I'm okay with doing them what I would call more of a country style, where you cube them. But I find the matchsticks are a little bit easier to cook evenly and all the way through. You just have to spend a little bit more extra time. And just like many of the things I've learned making for this show, it's something where it's pretty easy to start with, but you can kind of master it as you go along. So I'm going to take my giant potato here and make the first cut, always the most scary because it's going to rock. So what I like to do is I like to put it straight to the tip like that when I make my first cut. And then once I kind of have that focus point, I'm just going to slowly pinch it down. Once I have that, I got my 2 little sections. I'm going to continue quartering them like that, doing these one at a time. It's not going to be exactly matchstick, and it's not a big deal if I don't get them perfectly thin. but I'm just going to get them nice and close as best as I can. Another approach I thought about taking is instead going to cube them, but then instead dicing them down. But overall I like this. I'll just choke up on the knife like that, and I'll just, oh, that'll work. Not exactly matchstick, but small enough that they're going to all cook very quickly in the butter. But yeah, in researching for this recipe, there's a lot of different techniques I kind of came across for this. Like some places, what I saw recommended was that you actually boil your potatoes first. Like, so you cut them, do all the prep, but then you boil them so they're nice and soft. Other places recommend just soaking them to get off a lot of the excess starch. Again, going back to how you can really master it if you really want to do all that, but you don't need to. Gonna get these a little bit thinner by just doing some simple dicing. Probably go ahead and make a bunch of tiny cubes. I feel like, maybe not cubes, but sections. I feel like that's kind of more how this is going. Not a big deal, but I did know I just wanted to make several really tiny slices to get probably a lot of butter on them, and they can kind of all cook very nicely. But depending on how you want, sometimes I've known people who what they prefer is you have a nice big solid brown patch that's really burnt up, and the rest is still not undercooked, but rather is like warm. You don't have a big soaking spot of butter that's honestly, I would say pretty tasty, but there's a lot of different ways, like most breakfast foods, where you can cook it slightly differently to suit your individual tastes. Like working at a breakfast place, I cannot tell you the number of ways people came up with to name different egg styles, because that's what their particular parents referred to it as. So like, we're gonna do these basically over easy or basted, but I hear people say like fried, that's another common one for basically the same style. I remember one particular customer who came in and he wanted it over easy, but I put him down for scrambled because he said, I just want you to mess it up. And I thought that he meant that surely I just wants to go in there and just scramble it. But no, he wanted over easy. And I think after all this time, what I basically learned about people and eggs is everyone just wants you to cook them the same way their mom does. And that can be a little difficult because I don't know their mom. So I got this over on high. Probably turn it down just a little bit so we don't cook up all my butter. So we went ahead and left this butter out a little bit before we started cooking so it would be room temperature. I'm going to wet this down as much as I can. Butter's the classic thing here, and you can substitute other stuff depending on how much you want. Like I know there was actually a lot of customers at that place I worked where they'd like dry hash browns. And you can do that where you don't use any butter, it's dry, but you have to cook them for a lot longer to get that same kind of reaction that I'm gonna be going for. So I like to use butter. And I think honestly, when people say they like hash browns, they mean they like potatoes that have soaked up a lot of butter. And this takes probably the longest out of the entire dish. So I'm gonna get those going as best I can. Cool. If you do boil them, one thing that's kind of nice is you can cook them down to form kind of a patty. And then at that point, what I would do is I would purposely press them down to kind of get them to stick together. It's up to you. Like if you're going for very large cubes, it's not a huge deal, but it is something that's available. It makes it way easier to flip if you do the patty approach. But then it's a little bit harder to eat a la carte, I guess I would say, where one at a time instead of biting into a big chunk. But again, it's entirely your preference and how you probably grew up eating stuff. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to make is the sausage. Oh yeah, that's plain potato. So sausage, one reason I really like sausage and I want to do it for this show is I actually avoided sausage for a while, just something about the the texture and the spices really just didn't sit with me, but it's really kind of come back for me and I've really enjoyed it. And it's something where sausage is very easy to make, but it's pretty fancy because I don't know about you, but I don't have sausage for breakfast every day. But it doesn't have the same amount of involvement bacon does. So all I really need to do is like, oh, I'm at the store, I know some people are coming over, let me just buy some sausage and I'll look like I have this really fancy thing, when really I don't doesn't really give take much more effort than, say, some eggs. So I'm going to be cooking these alongside my potatoes. I'll probably put down some butter as well. But for the most part, they just need to sit, and I'll flip them occasionally. And the way I like sausage myself is I like it to be very blackened, so I'm going to basically burn two sides of it, is what it's going to look like, but it's going to taste delicious. And you don't have to use butter. It's fine to just use, say, some pan spray for this. I know personally what I really like is I love dishes that you just kind of all cook together. So I personally like making skillets. I have this really nice cast iron skillet at my house where I'll just cook, say, the sausage or some bacon in it to start with. And then once that's done, you pull that out and you begin to cook the potatoes in it, in the bacon fat itself. And then as you get closer and closer, you crack an egg straight into the skillet and you cover it up and it will just kind of baste itself. So I'm going ahead and leave that to cook. After a little while, I'll go ahead and go ahead and flip those. It just kind of depends on what you particularly want. Then we're just going to make some simple eggs. I wanted to go for basting eggs because it's pretty simple what the concept is, but it also has a certain layer of fanciness to it where if you don't want, like say if you want a really runny egg on the inside, all basted is I'm going to crack it like I would a over easy or over hard egg, but I'm going to ideally cover it and I'm going to put some water in to cook the top, to steam it. So it's just a nice little thing, and if you often break your yolks when making over easy eggs, it's a nice way to prevent that. So I'm going to get that as is. Turn this down just a little bit. And I don't do this much, but you'll notice as these cook, a lot of times if you make eggs at home, you'll notice they get this thin layer of film on the side. And not film, but like an outline is what I kind of say, where it cooks really hard. And there is a couple ways to prevent that. One way is to literally fry your egg in oil. That is extremely hard, but supposedly makes the best eggs. But the preferred way is you can actually put them in a strainer and kind of strain the egg whites, because the egg white themselves will hold it together. And basically you'll lose this white section out, but you'll keep the heart of the egg, so to speak, and you won't get this film on the outside, which some people like, some people don't. So I'm going to go ahead and baste these. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this up. I've always learned to use very makeshift covers, but it doesn't have to be airtight, but it helps. I'm going to toss just some water in there and turn it back up. And what the goal of that is to ideally steam the top so that you get this kind of thin white film that will hold the egg together. And you just have to get used to how much to put in, because you don't want so much where you actually cool down your pan. Because I've had that happen where I'll put in like half a cup and it does nothing because my pan's suddenly very cold. But you want enough that it kind of works. So I'm going to go over here, check on these sausages. So these are looking pretty good. I'm going to turn them. Just keep the tongs on me. And like I said, sausage is pretty easy to work with. That's what I really like, is it doesn't take much to go get some and then very quickly have a pretty fancy breakfast. And honestly, I say it because I don't want to have it be much work, but really the answer is I'm usually probably doing something else when I'm cooking breakfast, like getting ready for the day or what have you. But I could easily see myself making this before work and just kind of have it keep coming out. So I'm going to get one good flip. It looks like some of them are a little more seared than others, but I didn't mention it, but I like to cut them in half so you can see the inside because those will cook a little bit differently. It's not, I've tried to tempt them, and that does work where they are safe to eat, but by cutting into them, you can see, are they actually cooked completely all the way through? I'm gonna check on my hash browns. So you'll notice, see if I can get a good section of these. They're starting to develop this like little brown on there. And that's what we're going for. This would be a point where I would, depending on how much you want, like if that's enough for you, I would say flip them all, press them down. If not, like I like actually, since it's kind of cut and cooked in grease, I like a pretty hefty burn on all this. I don't know what it is about potatoes and sausage, but it doesn't taste like a burn. It tastes like it's a really nice sear, and it adds a little bit of flavor. So, going to check on my eggs. Cool. Looks like I might need a little bit more water, but you can see how with the water you get these like tougher tops. And I might even want to improvise here and go for a simple over easy because I don't want to dump too much water on these, but at the same time, I like getting the top. I want to make sure it's nice and sealed. I do like a sloppy egg, but I've never been a sunny side up person. That's a little bit too far for me. Should have gone for the scale. There we go. All right, there we go. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of improvise. Get over there. It's kind of interesting how when I go to baste them versus a over easy or over hard approach, how much thicker the individual yolk gets. So you'll notice like this one over here, it's basically stood up by the thickness of the yolk. Something about how when you cook them on all sides, I believe the idea is the moisture goes towards the center so they kind of suck in. Whereas when you cook them over easy or over hard, they stay nice and flat and you get basically an egg pancake you can kind of just flip around. But these are looking pretty good. Going to go ahead and take some of my pepper. I've definitely been going through a phase of very peppery eggs. I think I said on one of the first shows that what I liked about cooking, and I would often do, is to understand a little bit more about how an ingredient worked. I would just put a ton of it on. For some stuff like cheese, that's pretty nice, but I wasn't really sure the effect pepper or necessarily salt had on the food. Like I know what pepper tastes like and what salt tastes like, but actually getting it in that context where you can taste a ton of it, you're like, okay, I wouldn't ever make it again this way, but I understand what it's doing each time. All right. Keep kind of roll these. I believe also you can go and bake sausage. I'm a huge fan of doing like a iron skillet though. That's my personal take. But it is very flexible because really I'm doing this mainly for the sear. You can heat them up any way you find appropriate. And again, I heavily recommend going instead for like a skillet. Let me get some more butter in here because it looks like not everything's quite. I'm essentially sauteing this. That's kind of why I left that extra little pat of butter in the corner. So I don't want to necessarily cook it in the butter. I want to get butter on all the surface. And then if this isn't going, I might have to turn it up a little more as well. Because the potatoes don't always take the way you expect them to. Like it's always interesting how you'll see a fairly thick piece of potato sear up really fast, and then there's a tiny one that just refuses to go sometimes. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and start working on plating this up. So a big art, I think, of cooking breakfast is getting it all to come out because it doesn't really work to, or having it all come out together. It doesn't really work to serve things individually. But I'll often have my eggs come out a little bit earlier. So that's why I usually cook them later as well. Let me go ahead and grab those. I feel like it's just always easy to add some cheese on here to these eggs, and I also heavily recommend doing it into the hash browns. And that's something already I want to talk about, how you can do a lot with hash browns. So I would actually recommend, I would normally make these with onions and particularly mushrooms. You'd saute them before, or rather I should say separately, because you want the potatoes to cook, and cook them all together in a kind of hash. And then if you want, you can add shredded cheese. That's basically the go-to way. Although I was actually surprised how, when I worked at the restaurant, one very common thing that I thought was super, originally I thought was cheap, but I was won over by, was American cheese on it. And I thought, oh, it's just us being cheap where we want one slice instead of throwing in a ton of shredded. But I was like, you know, actually, it's pretty nice where you can make a nice like flat bed of hash browns. You can lay that on top, put it with, say, some salsa, and then you can just get a little bit of cheese with each bite. Whereas the other way around with the shredded cheese is you have to like really drown it. Like, it's nice and it's effective, but you have to use a lot. And that doesn't always work for every dish. There we go. So I'm going to go and grab some of these. Might have like a little bit of a hot spot, so I'm going to rotate these around. Awesome. Take these potatoes. It looks like I get a hot spot on my plate right about here, so I'm going to rotate these. Fish a little bit out to taste test with. Okay. As they get pretty good, closer here, I'm going to salt them. This is entirely up to you how much you want to use. I would say I go pretty light on the salt and the pepper while they're cooking, because I don't want it to be, once it's on there, you can't really take it off. That said, putting it on while it's cooking, it will hide it better, but you'll still get some of the flavor. But I prefer dishes that you spice, I guess, at the table, because again, I don't want to put someone in a position where I like really spicy or heavily salted potatoes, and then they just have to live with that. They can put it on if they want. It's about 3 minutes. Cool. So let me plate up this sausage. Another thing that I think goes well with cutting these in half is it's just a better serving size. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll let this rest. That's a very common thing to do with, I guess, large meats. So it's, because you want it to be juicy, and these are juicy, but if you sometimes cut into them too soon, the juice will come out, and you don't want it to come out until you bite it. So you can let it rest. Or similar with like bacon, you might want to actually put some like towels down, depending on how much grease you want. But I actually heavily recommend, if you've never done it before, getting a nice bed of some kind of meat like bacon or sausage, ham, and then cooking some of your other ingredients in that. Like, this would be a perfect time where if I was making another meal to instead crack the egg straight in there, and it's honestly pretty nice, and all the flavors kind of go pretty well together, particularly if you like your peppers and stuff. Those add a lot of flavor if you cook them with it rather than separately. Perfect. These are looking like they're done now. They're pretty good there. So I'm going to scoop out, get away from that little butter pool so I don't take all of it with me, and dish that up as well. And if you want these to be a little bit drier, I would almost say you could let them cook down, if that makes sense, to boil out the rest of the butter, but I think it's important to also serve it with a meal. It's something where I don't want to judge anyone how they want their hash browns. Some people, they would never admit it, but like I said, they want the potatoes they're pretty much exclusively to just soak up the butter and salt. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put these. We'll have our dinner. Usually I would serve this with some veggies. I love skillets and some toast or whatever you take. Some fruit works really well to finish it out. And you have your nice, simple little breakfast. It's actually all pretty easy, and it gives us a lot of ingredients that I can take from other meals or to roll forward to other meals like the sausage or in particular the potatoes, I think are what we're going to be shooting for the next time on Second Plate.